right, welcome back everyone. So glad that y'all are here today. Today we are going over the next Mazzaroth, and that is going to be Sagittarius and its 3 decans Lyra, Aura, and Draco. If you're new here, we are discussing these biblical stories in the stars, known from the book of Job as the Mazzaroth, which the enemy has hijacked and made into paganized forms of worshiping the stars. If you have missed any of our past videos, you can review them on our YouTube channel or on our Explore page that I'll have down in the description or in the chat. And our goal here is to return the stars to their original evangelistic intent. I invite you to set aside any past thoughts, preconceived ideas, anything that you know about the stars, astronomy, or astrology. I also invite that you bring the Holy Spirit along with you on this journey to help guide your thoughts around this subject, because it's only through the Holy Spirit's power and guidance that the truth can be revealed behind the truth of the stars. So if you have any questions and you're on the Zoom, feel free to drop them in the chat. Denise is going to monitor those. And then as we get to topic changes between the constellations, we'll address those. If you're watching the replay, feel free to comment down in the comments section or email me from the Explore page. I'll do my best to answer those for you. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. Most of you already know me. My name is Dylan Archer. I am Denise's son. That's where most of you all know me from. I am 29 years old. I have a passion for astronomy and technology. At this moment, my favorite verse is Proverbs 25:2, which I think is a really great verse for everything that we're going through, where it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it is the glory of kings to search it out. So I thought that'd be fun to add in there. Now, that Explore place that I was talking about is really going to be the best place to find all those details. If you're watching the replay, or even if you're on Zoom right now, you can just take out your phone and scan this QR code just with your general camera. You don't need a special app or anything like that. And it should take you to a page that looks similar to this, where you can watch past videos, you can download those PDFs that I've been talking about, and you can also email me. Some of these buttons have been moved around, so don't be alarmed if you don't see that PDF at the top or the email button there. But let's go ahead and hop into the presentation, but first let's go ahead and pray. So, Father God, I want to thank you for this time and all the things that you do for us, and especially for your patience with us as we go through life and we discover these things. I thank you for sharing yourself in many areas in deeper, more meaningful ways. I ask that you give us your spiritual ears to hear what you want us to hear and block out anything that is not of you, Lord. We ask that you would protect this time, open our eyes and our hearts, let your words speak loud through this call, and all else fall away, not to be a distraction to us. We ask all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. So let's recap a little bit of what we have gone over so far. So we know God had made the world. He made it livable and lasting, but he needed a steward. So he made Adam and Eve. With making Adam and Eve, he gave us full authority over the earth and all of its domains. But the serpent came, deceived Adam and Eve. By disregarding God's instructions and obeying Satan, Adam and Eve came under a different covenant and basically a different rulership, which is the enemy. So now sin has entered the world by man when the serpent deceived Adam and Eve. So God needed a solution to save us, his first love, humanity. And since it happened through humanity, he would bring a human man to come and redeem us. So a man must come, redeem mankind. We can see this prophesied first in Genesis 3:15, when he says that, when God, talking to the serpent, says, I will put an enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. We know that women don't carry the seed. It is the man that carries the seed. So then that way we knew that it was going to be an immaculate conception, and that's where we have Jesus. So this verse gives us a clue that it is her seed, the woman. And then in Isaiah 7, it talks about that very same idea, that the son shall be born of a woman, and he will come to crush the head of the serpent. So this sets the stage for the first 4 signs in the Mazzaroth zodiac. And with that, we have already covered the first 3. The first one was Virgo, Coma, Centaurus, and Bootes. And what that was telling us was that the story begins with sin has happened, people needed to be delivered and redeemed. God promised to send a Messiah. We saw that in Coma, that is Jesus with Mary. But with that, he was going to be despised, and he was going to be desire of all nations and also despised by man at the same time. And we saw that with Centaurus, because he was both man and both God, and centaurs were always seen as kind of these despised creatures. So it lended to that full detailed story of Jesus being desired of all nations, but also despised by man. But with sin, we needed this righteous branch to come and become a conquering king. And so Libra, with Crux, Lupus, and Corona, tells of the law introduced. And it's basically telling us that a price must be paid. The blood at first will cover sin, then it will completely redeem us from sin. He will lay down his life and take on what all of his people should be victimized. He will take away sin. And it is a terrible, horrible price that must be paid, but he will do it and do it willingly. He will do this for the joy that is set before him. He will do this thing that no other can do and will not remain defeated, but be exalted as the greatest king ever. And then this, of course, led into what we discussed last week with Scorpio, Scorpio being the enemy with three other decans, serpents, Orpheus, and Hercules. So Jesus has to come, and he has been crucified and buried. Scorpio tells of those 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's telling us that there's a great war against the power of darkness and death itself. Though many have been wounded, a crushing blow to the enemy is coming. Though many battles have been lost, the war will be won. The serpent will not get the crown. Dominion belongs to our mighty king and to those of his kingdom. It's an ugly battle. Death will not have the victory, and the struggle will be worth it. So again, we saw that with Corona from Libra, and how the serpent in Orpheus and Serpens is trying to gain that crown of divinity. It's like right here in the night sky. It's cut off there with the image. But Orpheus, meaning Jesus, is holding back the enemy from being able to take back the crown from him, like he did back with Adam, the first man. So today, we're going to be talking about Sagittarius, which is Jesus, the victorious one. And we have Lyra, Ara, and Draco. And this story is the power and the glory of the conquering prince will be awesome. We will see him both as God and as a human being who is the very apex of all humanity. His light is not to be compared with the enemy's darkness. We will praise our utmost and sing our highest at his coming. He will have his great day of vengeance and will cast the dragon into the lake of fire. The enemy will be destroyed, and that day will be the greatest of all days. So, before we start with our first sign, Sagittarius, let's hop over into the night sky and see a little bit of where we're going to be and what we're going to see. So, we do see Sagittarius here right in the middle of the screen. Let's make sure we are at this very moment. So, here we are. So this is as of right now. Obviously, it's going to be a little hard to see because the sun is up, but you can look due south. Now, it is possible to see as of now, but you would have to wake up about an hour before the sun rises in order to see Sagittarius. And it is generally up in the later months of the year, which we'll cover a little bit there on later slides here. So let's go ahead and go back to the slide here and hop into Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is actually seen as a great centaur, coming in confidence and strength with his bow drawn to the fullest. The arrow is ready to fly, and indeed it is in fact aimed directly at the heart of Scorpio, which is Satan, the enemy. So it's really cool prophetic imagery that this arrow is ready to fly, and whenever it does, it will pierce the heart of the scorpion, the enemy. Now, we have seen a centaur in the past. We saw it in Virgo. It is one of the signs, and we talked about that just a second ago. And again, centaurs weren't always seen as the most positive or adorned creatures. They were actually, in mythological stories, they were actually driven out and told to have been eradicated or extinct. Now we know that they weren't real creatures, but just an interesting detail as far as the fact that centaurs were not desired, and Jesus was also the desired of all man, but or desired of all nations, but then despised by man. So it's kind of interesting story symmetry there. So, but there are actually a ton of verses with Sagittarius, as you can see on screen here. Now, I am not going to go over all of these verses that tell everything of Jesus being 100% God and Jesus being 100% human. I did want to put them, though, because I do feel like it is important for anybody that is wanting to do their own research. I know that was one of the things that I enjoyed doing whenever I first learned about this subject. So you are welcome to screenshot this and look those up. And I do want to give credit. I got all of these from Troy Brewer's book, Looking Up. He did a lot of this research and added those in there. So I don't want to take credit for finding all these verses. It was definitely Troy Brewer. But with these other verses that are going to help tell the story of Sagittarius, the first time we hear about an archer is in Genesis 21, when Haggai's son is learning how to use a bow and arrow in the wilderness. We'll see the significance of the bow and arrow in Sagittarius's stars and names, and even his meaning here in the next few slides. We will see quite a few similarities to Centaurus from week 1 with Virgo, as being despised and rejected, detailed in Isaiah 53. But we will see him rise as the glorious one, written in Psalm 45. And lastly, in Psalm 45 and Revelation 6, it still uses language comparable to the sign of Sagittarius, being a bow-wielded and being dual-natured. So, again, I just want to reiterate that these verses are not mine. I did adapt those from Troy Brewer. So, all right, so let's go ahead and hop into some names here. So Sagittarius has been seen across multiple cultures, many different Egyptian cultures here, even Arabic and Hebrew. So we have 3 names that all share the same name, but from different cultures. So the one that we know is Latin. It is Sagittarius, and it does mean archer. You have Kiseth, which is Hebrew and Syriac. And then you do have the Arabic name Al-Kawr, and that means the arrow. Oh, excuse me, I missed one. We have Toxotis, which is Greek. And those, obviously, you can see they're all the same meaning. They're all an archer, which is kind of fun, given Denise's in my last name. But adding more depth, these other cultures have a slightly different translation, but still lending to the same Sagittarius story and its true meaning. So you got the Al-Kawr, which is Arabic for the arrow. And then you got Pimmaker, which is Coptic. It means the graciousness or the beauty of the coming forth. And then you have Nunki, which is Akkadian for prince of the earth. And then you have Nem, which is Egyptian for he who comes, which he who conquers. I apologize. And again, this one does share a lot of similarities with Bootes, because Bootes is actually he who comes. And there's a lot of language, especially in other cultures, that also call Bootes he who conquers instead of just he who comes. So now some of the stars do help tell that very same story. In Hebrew, you have Nem, and it is the glorious one, the one who comes, and that's the same word is used in Psalms 45, the glorious one. And then you have Nehushta. In Hebrew, it's the going and the sending forth. You have Al-Naam, which is Arabic, the gracious one. Al-Shaula, also Arabic, meaning dart or the dart. Al-Warida, which is Arabic, who comes forth. Ruchba, or Rami, also Arabic, the riding of the bowman. Interesting similarities to this is a lot of cultures actually use the same word for bow and rainbow. So there was a lot of similarities to promise whenever it came to Sagittarius as well, kind of like the rainbow given to Noah, promising that God would not flood the earth again, the new covenant that he created with him. So now, the story of Centaurus, it's very similar to what we have seen before, like I've been alluding to with Centaurus. In Virgo, we saw it first, but the difference between the two is obviously this centaur has a different name, even though it is representing the same character. At a different stage in the great story. So these dual-natured characters, known as centaurs, being both horse and man, reveals the God-man of Jesus Christ, who came to accomplish the wonderful works of overthrowing the power of the enemy and redeeming sinful man. Centaurus was the despised one that Isaiah wrote about in Isaiah 53. But Sagittarius is showing the same dual-natured God-man, but now as the victorious one. Psalms 45 reveals Jesus like this picture, this bowman, dual-natured. Because in verse 2, he's described as the gracious one, which we saw that there's a star named the gracious one. We have verse 4 as the prince of who comes forth, and as the great archer in verse 5. And then you have him as the prince of the earth in verse 6. That was also a star name of one of the stars in Sagittarius. And notice the difference between the two pictures in the night sky. Centaurus is actually set low in the south, like Jesus coming down as a man, but now he is up high in the path of the sun, redeemed and glorified on high. So even the position of these two centaurs is actually a prophetic storytelling of, what Jesus had to do. He went down and then he came back up. Now, the arrow of Centaurus is aimed at Scorpio's heart, and it is seen as the depiction of the mortal wound inflicted upon the heart of the deadly enemy. So I thought that was really fun to add in there, because unfortunately, you can't see it in this picture, and whenever we switch over to the software, you won't see that arrow pointed directly at the heart of Scorpio, but a lot of the old star atlases do show that Sagittarius is aiming directly at Scorpio. So I thought that was fun to add in there. Now in the natural, it is seen by looking east as of this moment between the horizon and Antares before 6 a.m. local time. It's not a particularly striking group of stars, so you won't see a star in there and be like, oh, that's Centaurus. You're gonna see the stars, but they're not going to be starkly alarming like visually. But they are visible along the southern horizon in late summer, and the best time to see it is actually between June and August. So again, that is Centaurus. You can see, like I was talking about, you can kind of see that arrow. It is aiming at Scorpio, but the other thing that I'm noticing is his arms like a little bit up. So if you kind of draw a line with these stars here, it does aim more towards the center of Scorpio. But really fun additive there. I vaguely remembered this corona, this crown, being related to Sagittarius, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So I'll definitely have to do a little bit more digging to try and find that. The reason why I bring that up is because we also had corona with Orpheus, Boetus, and Libra, and it's right here. And that corona is actually the crown adorning Jesus's head, which we know Boetus is the representation of Jesus as he's come back as the herdsman, and this is his crown of victory. So I thought it was interesting that there was another corona crown, just with a different tail name in order to identify where it is in the night sky. That was right next to Sagittarius, and Sagittarius represents that victory after the crucifixion. So fun little detail there. So now our next star group that we're going to discuss is Lyra. Let me find Lyra. There she is. Right there. So you can see this harp picture right here. It is actually directly overhead at this moment for mostly everybody. I am in the central time zone in this software, so it is going to be more directly overhead for us in central time. Not quite overhead for anybody over on the West Coast, and probably past overhead for anybody on the East Coast. So with that, let's go ahead and go back to the presentation and check out Lyra. All right. First things first, let me make sure no questions. Anybody have any questions, any comments? All right. Okay. So we have Lyra, and Lyra is the harp. It is seen as a stringed instrument, or also a lyre, L-Y-R-E. I may be mispronouncing that too. But the ancient star maps in the Egyptian Dendera zodiac often showed Lyra as a rising eagle. And you can actually see that in this picture. They've kind of merged the two together. Now, this eagle had an attitude of triumph, also revealed in the picture of being the enemy of the serpent. You know, birds are one of the truer enemies of snakes. And the interesting thing about eagles and falcons and birds that you know, destroy serpents is they actually take them to outside of their realm of comfortability, meaning they swoop down, they take the snake, and then they take it really high, and then they drop it. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective as far as spiritual warfare goes as well. God generally does things that takes the enemy out of his realm where he has no power. So I thought that was a pretty interesting aspect to add in there. But this is confirmed in the star names that we will be discussing soon on some other slides. And again, I want to make sure that this photo used is actually an adaptation of both the eagle and the harp. It's not actually like that in the night sky, kind of like we just saw. This was actually developed by Bollinger, which is one of the individuals that I get a lot of this content from. He had an individual, excuse me, draw out these constellations with the stars and the names in there. And so that is actually where I get all these photos from. So one of the other names given to Lyra is actually from the ancient Egyptian Dendera zodiac, and it means the serpent ruled. It's Fent Kar. And then there are actually two Hebrew words used to describe this constellation. One Hebrew word is Nashir, which means an eagle, and Nasor, which is a harp. Though there is question of its original name, they're both good imagery of the same story told by the sign, which is praise shall ascend up as an eagle toward heaven when all living things shall send up their praise. So really fun. Dual meaning there, even though the picture is, I guess you could say, contested. So now the first time a stringed instrument is used is by describing someone's skill in Genesis 4:21. The same Hebrew word used there is also used in Exodus 4 and Revelation 5 when the people of God are being delivered from bondage. The first in Exodus is whenever the Israelites and Moses first crossed the Red Sea from Egypt. And then again in Revelation, when the church is once and for all freed from Satan and sin, and it's identified as praises is given to God for, you know, the work that he has done to set us free. So praise is also a very important and powerful tool throughout the Bible, mentioned in Psalms 21 and Isaiah 52, and especially when prophesying of Jesus' coming to conquer. So said, you know, another way is, oh, I'm so sorry, I went to the wrong slide. Said another way, the harp was used since the beginning of time in Genesis 4. We see they're likely taught to man by God for the use of praising. The same Hebrew word used in Exodus 15 when Moses and the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. Again, it is also interestingly used in Revelation 5 when the people of God are delivered from the bondage of sin and Satan. So the harp here is tied to the joy and gladness of the archer's victory. So now some other mythological stories do still carry the same message, although a little bit perverse, like we've seen across the past signs. So with that, the Greeks actually have a story of the harp was presented to Orpheus by Apollos, which Apollos is interesting because this is the second time we're hearing about him. Apollos was actually the father of Hercules, and last week we saw that Hercules has a lot of similarities to Jesus.
Okay, so I just stated that Apollos was the father of Hercules, and we know that if you just do a quick Google search, that's not true. It's actually Zeus that is the father of Hercules, and it's Ophiuchus that is the son of Apollos. I got those mixed up because last week we were talking about Scorpio, who both has Ophiuchus and Hercules in it. The point here is that the father gave a gift to the hero to do great things, which is the same thing that we see in Jesus. The Father God was giving Jesus the power to do these great things. Jesus himself even stated that he doesn't do anything that he doesn't see the Father doing. So I don't want anybody to get mixed up here. We got a lot of mythological characters. So even I get mixed up. And it's actually funny because I mentioned Ophiuchus last week, and we're going to talk about Ophius here in just 1 second. But so don't get too mixed up. The whole point here is just relating how mythology has perversed Jesus and the story of his relationship with the Father. So back to the video.
But with that, Orpheus was able to achieve great things with this harp, like calming the raging seas, sounds familiar, enchanting the mountains, stopping the flows of rivers, and removing the pain of those who are suffering. So a lot of interesting similarities between Jesus and how this harp is used by an individual. Now in the natural, it is high in the summer sky for us in the northern hemisphere. And it is best seen in obviously the summer months there. Now some of the stars in Lyra actually do carry a lot of the weight of the true meaning there. So like Vega is he shall be exalted. Well, this is the time period right after the crucifixion. And then we also have Shilayak or Shayak and Al Nasir, which is Arabic, meaning eagle. And then you also have Solafat, which is the ascending, as in praise or springing up. So lots of fun additives and deeper meanings to this sign, just in the names itself.
Okay, so what someone asked if there was a verse about casting the enemy down, like taking him out of his element and then dropping him. And the closest one is Revelation 12:7-9 that I put in the chat. Specifically, I think it's verse 9, and it says, he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And that's in the Amplified. I'm always in the Amplified unless I say otherwise. That's just my favorite. Another one that I haven't put in the chat yet is Isaiah 14:12. This one English Standard Version is the best one. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn, how you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. Yeah, that's two of them. I don't think any of the, Ezekiel 28:17. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. So, that's just a few.
And to add to that, we are actually going to discuss Draco today, which talks about the enemy being cast down and cast out and his power removed and him being destroyed. And the fun thing actually is each time, so I think I broke this down before. There's actually 3 sections of 4 constellations that each tell a different part of the story. So the first 4 tell of the first coming of Jesus. And then the next 4 tell of the church age, which is what we live in. And then the last 4 tell of the second coming, the final conquering and the final casting away of the enemy and casting him into the fiery lake of hell forever. And the interesting thing is at the end of each one of those, let's just call them chapters, or I've been calling them acts, like in a play. as I've been describing this. So like at the end of each act of the play, the enemy is always being defeated one way or another, and he is being exemplified by different characters. So I won't ruin it too much here, but the example that I'll give is actually so this set of four constellations, and what I mean by the four is like Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius. I know that each one of them has 3 signs, but these 3 signs help tell the major signs story. But at the end of each act, the enemy is being cast out, he's being bound up, and he's being destroyed, and we'll see that all, through other characters. So like, since this is the ending of Act 1, we're going to see the enemy being cast out. And then at the end of Act 2, whenever we get to sign number 8, we're going to see the enemy being bound up in the character Cetus, which is in the night sky. And then in the final act, the enemy is destroyed once and for all as the old serpent Hydra. And one thing that I have actually never noticed in the Bible is how many times the enemy is referred to as the serpent of old. And so it's kind of interesting to catch those details as I'm going through all of this content again, and how, he's called of old and the serpent. So just interesting details that, you catch whenever you do something again, whenever you thought you've already caught it all. It's kind of like the Bible. You'll reread it again, and then you'll find something else that you didn't catch the first time. And you're like, oh, that's an interesting degree that I didn't see it as, or a different perspective. So, but yeah, all of that to say, I do think this first 4, especially here with Draco that we're going to cover, carries that meaning of the bird of prey taking the serpent out of its element so that it has no power, which we're actually going to interestingly see what happens here in Ara. So before we do Ara, let's hop over to Sky Safari here. So again, we did just discover Lyra here. We do have Vega. Vega is actually a very, very bright star to be seen in the night sky. In fact, I should know this. I believe it's the 4th brightest star in the night sky. It's the 5th brightest. Here we go. 5th brightest star in the night sky, which is interesting because 5 represents grace. So the 5th brightest star gives us grace, especially whenever it comes to praise be to God. So lots of fun stuff surrounding that. So, but our next sign is actually going to be Ara, and it is going to be a very interesting perspective because we're coming straight from above us down to almost below us. So we're going to be looking south, and it is the southernmost constellation of these constellations we're discussing, not the southernmost Mazzaroth signs though. So here's Ara. You can see it here right below Scorpio and right below Sagittarius here. So now I'm sure you've noticed the oddity of the fact that it is upside down, and that is not by accident. So let's actually discuss that. Let's go back to the presentation here. Okay. So it is viewed as an altar, and it is upside down. On it, the fire blazes down towards Tartarus, which is the outer darkness. Now, the ancient Egyptian Dendera zodiac shows this sign as a man enthroned with a flail in his hand. The man is given the same name as Hercules, which we saw last week, but that name is actually not Hercules itself because the Greeks hadn't formed their culture yet. But the name given to him is Bau, B-A-U, which we saw in the very first sign with Virgo. And it's actually derived from the Hebrew word Bo, B-O, which means he who comes. And again, that is seen in Isaiah 63:1. Now, another name is given to this constellation known as Al-Magamara, which is ancient Egyptian, and it means the completing or being finished. So, and again, we're going to see the meaning of why it is the finishing here in a little bit. So The verses that we know in the Bible that carry this story is actually from Matthew 25 and Revelation 20, that the Lord will cast the enemy into the fiery lake and cursed to stay there forever. Keep in mind the word cursed, because there's actually something interesting about Ara there. There is also a curse cast upon the enemy in Psalms 21. And we saw that that this sign was also seen as the man named Bo from the Dendera zodiac. Again, this name Bo derives from the Hebrew word B-O, Bo, meaning he who comes. And we know this man as Jesus, who shall come once and for all to judge both the living and the dead, finally. There is an interesting detail about how the word Ara is used in the Greek culture. They would use this word as a way of cursing or imprecating someone or something. This relates to the curse of the enemy above. So, like we have curse words, Ara was a curse word, especially to someone that you wanted to imprecate. So, really interesting how it relates to that cursing of the enemy. Now, the spiritual symbolism of Ara is referred to as the fire of judgment, which consumes the enemy of the mighty Sagittarius. The constellation Ara reminds us that the conquering Sagittarius goes on in his battle to complete and overthrow in the final perdition of the enemy. He is the one that will spoil the principalities and the powers of darkness and triumph over them to one day take down the great dragon and the old serpent and cast them into the fiery abyss. The very same Psalm 21 that talks about he who comes with bow and arrow of deliverance and praise from the stringed instrument will also cast down the evil into the fiery oven to be devoured. So the whole entire Psalm 21 is actually a very great storytelling of Sagittarius, Lyra, Ara, and obviously Draco here, because Draco is the enemy, which we'll get to, that's going to be cast into this fiery oven to be devoured forever. Now, again, Ara does not have any significant bright stars that would draw your attention like Sagittarius, but it is, like we saw over in the software, it's south of Sagittarius in Scorpio's tail. The highest point in the night sky is about 10 p.m. in July, but it is difficult to view for most of us in the northern hemisphere just because of how low it is in the night sky there. The question in the chat is the fiery oven where the enemy gets sent to die? And that is the fiery oven. Yes, that's what it's referencing. And that's what this constellation Ara is detailing. So now Ara was a pretty short constellation there because we are already hopping right into Draco. But I do want to, again, show you Ara. That way you can see it there. You can actually see that it just shifted to give us real time here, because this is showing real time. It is 10:15 Central Standard Time at this moment. And this is actually truly what is able to be seen should the sun not be up. Obviously, the sun does block out quite a bit. But our very next sign that's related to Sagittarius, we saw Ara right here on the horizon. We have Sagittarius here, and we're going to pass Vega. There's Vega. Excuse me. I always get Lyra and Vega mixed up. We're going to pass Lyra and the star Vega to Draco. Now, the interesting thing about Draco is it actually used to be what our North Star pointed at. So at this moment, we have Polaris right here, and Polaris is actually our North Star. So if I hit play, as far as like time goes here, I'm going to warn you, it's going to go really fast and it's going to look super crazy. But watch the star of Polaris here. It's going to move the least. So you see how everything else is basically revolving around Polaris there. It's considered the North Star. Now, the interesting thing about the North Star is people are always like, oh, it's going to be the brightest, isn't it? Well, no, it's actually the 50th brightest star. So people are generally underwhelmed by Polaris whenever it's being pointed out, which is also an interesting story. I'm hoping to get to whenever we get to Ursa Major and Ursa Minor in Taurus, which Denise will be speaking that week. But Polaris is actually the represented as the throne of God, because of the verse that talks about how all the earth encircles the throne. Well, everything circles around Polaris. So Polaris is the representation of the throne of God. But the reason why I bring that up is because 4,500 years ago, one of the stars in Draco here actually used to be the North Star. But I don't know if you remember what I was talking about in the week of Scorpio. The Earth's tilt is actually 23.5 degrees. And over time, we've slowly turned, our pole has slowly turned and pointed to different locations. Now, why is that important? Well, it's actually pretty interesting that way back when, 4,500 years ago, some people even contest that it was even 6,000 years ago that this star was our North Star. Now, the software doesn't show that, because whenever I did 6,000 years ago, it actually does, it wobbles way too much for it to be considered the North Star. But the interesting thing is it's actually that progression of time from being set free from sin, i.e. the start at the garden, to whenever Jesus comes back, the throne of God. So 4,000 years ago, whenever I hit play, this thing doesn't really wobble very much, kind of identifying that we have centered, the earth has centered on the enemy, the evil, sin. And so then that way, that's everything what the world revolves around. But as Jesus is coming and his redemption and us receiving him as our savior, it's a really cool prophetic picture that pole star has slowly shifted to Polaris, which again, we're going to see a lot more of the depictions and the names and the meanings behind that whenever we do discuss Ursa Major here and Ursa Minor. So I just wanted to add that real quick, just because I thought that was one of the most phenomenal things that I learned more recently. Most of that content that I've just spoken is actually from Troy Brewer, especially in his book Looking Up, and some other YouTube videos. I'll start adding some of those YouTube videos to that Explore page, so then others can listen in on that, because it is definitely profound and it is definitely eye-opening. And it definitely is one of those mind-blowing things that you're like, of course, God, of course you could do something like that. So, but we're going to discuss Draco here. And though you can see it is as a dragon here, you are going to see a couple of pictures that kind of depict it in different character. I don't want to get too hung up on that. All you really need to know is the fact that it is the enemy, and we know the enemy to be in different many forms. We know him as a lion, we know him as a snake, we know him as, Leviathan, etc. But today we're going to do our best to stick strictly to the serpent, the dragon, and a little bit of Leviathan, the great sea monster. So with that, let's go back to the presentation. So we have Draco. It is the dragon, depicted as a long, winding dragon. Its head is not far from Lyra, that we just discussed, and its body is winding through the northern hemisphere, ending very closely to the pole star Polaris. Now, the Dendera zodiac actually shows this sign as a coiled snake under the front feet of Sagittarius, and its name is Herfint, which means the serpent accursed. Excuse me, I always get that mixed up with accused, but it is accursed. Again, talking back to Ara being a curse upon the enemy. Now, the word Draco is actually a Greek word, and that's where we get the name from, but it actually means trodden under, kind of like trodden underfoot. And we see that in Psalms 91. Now, getting into those verses, now that we've mentioned them, let's discuss a little bit more of that imagery of the enemy and being conquered and devoured and, not devoured, trodden under, and etc. And I'm sorry I didn't say it anytime sooner, but you can always scan this QR code and get to those verses and those quick reference sheets that we have. But in Genesis 1, we know God created all the creatures of the sea, including Leviathan or the dragon, whatever you want to depict that great sea monster as. Now, it doesn't actually say Leviathan or dragon. It says God created the sea monster. Now, through culture and through history, we've seen that these have been used interchangeably. But I think the real point of the story here is that it's an evil that is represented by the enemy, Satan, that is only conquerable by God. So, and some of these verses actually share that. So like in Revelation 12, Isaiah 27, and Psalms 74 and 91, explain that this large reptile creature will be cast down and removed from heaven to be crushed and unable to afflict God's people again. So again, it's that conquering that Jesus did for us on the cross. And now that he has descended and conquered hell, death, and the grave, he is risen again. The enemy has no power to crush or afflict us anymore, as long as we declare Jesus as our Lord and Savior. Now, in Genesis 1:21, again, it does talk about that God created the sea monster. I did put dragon in there just to help tell this Draco story, but I want to be clear. It does not say dragon. I even checked other, translations. The only other thing that I noticed about other translations is sometimes the word whale is used here instead, which is interesting because later on, whenever we discuss the enemy in the second act of these 12 signs story, Cetus is actually a whale-like sea monster. So really interesting, likely going to see Genesis 1:21 again. So now with that, let's kind of go into the detail of what this story is telling of the whole individual story of Jesus's return and redemption. So dragons have been recognized in many cultures and seen as a terrible monster, though widely believed to be fictitious. Now, through some cultures, they describe them as similar features, with similar features as some of those of prehistoric reptiles like dinosaurs. In fact, it is actually believed in some theories that dragons existed amongst the dinosaurs before the flood of Noah. The fact that they're mentioned in both the Old and New Testament are used to aid this theory greatly. But the Hebrew word for dragon is tenin, and is more commonly used as sea monster, only to be conquered by God himself. Now, the same word tenin is used in Genesis 1:21, whenever we were talking about that sea monster, and in Isaiah 27, whenever Leviathan is first mentioned. Now, this dragon is to be defeated and crushed, and we even see that in the night sky as Hercules is raising a foot to smash Draco's head, which we hear about in Genesis 3:15, where he will only be able to bruise his heel. And you can see Hercules right here, raised foot, about to crush the head of Draco. So really cool imagery there. Now with those stars, they help exemplify this story. So we have Restaban, the head of the subtle. We have Ethanin, the long serpent. Thuban, the subtle, which is Grumian in Hebrew. You also have Al-Wade, who is to be destroyed. Gain Siar, Hebrew, the punished enemy. Al-Athik, the fraudulent. Al-Dib, Arabic, the reptile. And Al-Asiya, Arabic, the bowed down. Very interesting. Obviously, again, we got Sagittarius, the bowman, the archer, and you got Draco being bowed down. So pretty cool imagery there, with these stars adding to that story. Now, in the night sky, again, it's not super obvious. The nice thing is we do have Ursa Major and Ursa Minor that are a little bit more noticeable than Draco is, given that Ursa Major and Ursa Minor embody the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper. But Draco does have about 80 stars in it. It is circumpolar, which means it can be seen all year round, because it does kind of circle that North Star that we were talking about. But Thuban, as I was mentioning while we were over in the software, used to be the pole star about 4,600 to 6,000 years ago. But due to the precession of the equinoxes, that's that slow rotation of the Earth's poles, it has progressed towards Polaris instead, which is a prophetic act of the turning away from Satan and his hold on humanity towards the throne of God. So lots of fun prophetic imagery there. So what is all this saying? What's that whole story coming together to tell? Well, it's the power and the glory of the conquering prince. And that glory and honor is going to be awesome. We will see him both as God and as human being, who is the very apex of humanity. His light is not to be compared with the enemy's darkness. We will praise our utmost and exalt him at his coming. He will have his great day of vengeance and will cast the dragon into the lake of fire. The enemy will be destroyed, and that day will be the greatest of all days. Now, this sign does conclude the first act of the 3 acts as mentioned from the first presentation. Now, each of these signs plays into a bigger picture, as we were talking about earlier, telling of the 3 stages of the redemption story. The first is the beautiful thing about this act is that each act concludes with a similar theme, the enemy being defeated. So here in Act 1, we see he is shown as the enemy being cast out and into the lake of fire. And in Act 2, it's going to show the enemy being bound up in Cetus. And then finally, in the final act, we'll see the enemy being destroyed as the old serpent Hydra. So now that does conclude Act 1 of this 3-part story. And this does get us all the way up to what we know as the present age, the church age, because all the first 4 signs tell of the prophesying of Jesus from Genesis 3:15 all the way up to the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus into heaven. And that's where we are now. So the next 4 signs are actually going to be really fun. They're going to start talking about the church age and how the church, God's people, are going to come together to band with God and turn into the bride of Christ that has been prophesied. So, so that is the conclusion of all of these first 4 constellations. I did want to go over the next 7 days, but before we do that, does anybody have any questions? Okay, so let's go over the next 7 days and we will reassess for any other questions. So on Wednesday, February 8th, we are actually going to see our dwarf planet Sirius. Did you even know that we had another planet? We technically have 10 planets if you include Pluto. But its name is Sirius, named after the Roman goddess of the harvest. And it will be going into retrograde motion, appearing to change directions. Remember back in December, we were talking about retrograde motion with Jupiter and Venus. It's going to be going into retrograde motion, appearing to change its direction on Wednesday inside the constellation Virgo. I thought that was actually pretty interesting. The planet, the dwarf planet, represented as the harvest, is actually in Virgo. So I thought that was pretty interesting detail. But it will keep this directional change up through mid-May. So in mid-May, we're going to start seeing it turn back around and doing its orbit again. Now, I do say we're going to see it. You can't see it with your naked eye. It is actually going to be need either binoculars or a telescope to see it. And just in case you were curious on where this planet is, it is actually right between Mars and Jupiter. And the reason why it's called a dwarf planet is because there's 3 classifications that makes a planet a full-blown planet. And it's if it can round itself out via gravity, so like instead of being weird oblong shaped, if it can clear out all of the debris around itself. And I can't remember what the third one. I vaguely remember it has to be within the same plane as all the other planets. Now I may be wrong, but we can hop over to that software and I can show that to y'all too. That one actually is pretty cool. But then on Thursday night, February 9th, it's going to be one of the best nights to see Orion's belt. It will be bright enough to notice despite the moon's brightness. And then Friday evening on February 10th, that comet C 2022 E3 ZTF, that long, hard to pronounce and remember name. It will be the closest to Mars at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's 6 a.m. Central Time, and that's 4 a.m. West Coast Time. So, but it will be it will be highest in the sky at 8 p.m. local time, and set around 3 a.m. local time on the next day, Saturday. So. The reason why I bring that up is because I know it's kind of hard to find an object that you can't see with your naked eye. But if you look at Mars and then you just look off to its, to Mars's east. No, I can't say Mars's east, to our east. So if you're looking up at Mars, it doesn't matter which direction you're facing, you just need to know which way's east. If you're looking up at the big red planet, Mars, you're going to be able to spot that. And then if you just go east, with with binoculars or a telescope, it's not going to be that far. Let me just show you in the software, because I might be just speaking a different language here. So let's do this. So we have, we're talking about February 10th here. So let's go to, so here's February 10th. Let's go find Mars. And it's going to be 8 p.m. local time. That's going to be best to see it. So let me hop to 8 p.m. We got 8 p.m. Okay. So directly overhead, you got Mars here. So just to give us a little bit of perspective, I'm looking due south. I always try and look south because whenever, I always try and keep north up and south down, instead of north down and south up. But that then does change east and west. So don't get too confused. So now east is going to be on your left side instead of your right side. But if you are looking straight up, you're going to be able to find a lot of objects, actually very bright and very noticeable. Again, this is 8 p.m. local time. It doesn't matter whether you're Central Time, East Coast time, West Coast time, because of how the time zones are divided up, you should still be able to do this within your own time zone. Give or take a little bit of directional things. So like, for example, Mars probably won't be exactly close to your zenith should you have been able to see that exact spot above your head, but I digress. So you're going to be able to see the brightest object. It's going to be red. It's not going to be this brilliant, but it is going to be a noticeable one that does not shimmer. Stars shimmer because of how far away they are. Planets don't because of how close they are. The best other way to find Mars, despite the redness, is you should be able to find Orion's belt. That's one of the most popular asterisms in the night sky, star formations. If that's also hard to find, just look for the brightest object in the night sky, and that's going to be Sirius. And then just start heading overhead, and you should find that red dot in the night sky. That's going to be Mars. Now, if you want to find the comet, like I said, you are going to need a telescope or binoculars. Yes, binoculars do work. They are basically just a dual-sided telescope. But you're actually going to be able to see that comet really close to Mars, again, with binoculars or a telescope. And it's going to be a greenish color. But this is going to be the closest it will be to Mars. Now, the other interesting thing that I was wondering if it was a prophetic message is if you'll notice the tail of a comet, which is always pointing away from the sun because it's being blasted with all that radiation. The tail of a comet is always pointing away from the sun. So with that, I thought that was pretty cool that the tail of the comet lines up directly with Taurus's horn. Isn't that pretty cool?
What date is this again, Dylan?
This is February 10th, 2/10/2023.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, the closest it will be to Mars is 7 a.m. on the 10th, but at 8 p.m. local time, you're still going to be able to see it close, but it just won't be the closest. So just another fun detail about that. Whoop. I lost my light. There we go. So fun stuff with that comment there. Again, I'm so sorry you're not going to be able to see it with unaided eye. So you are going to need a telescope or binoculars. But the next thing is actually going to be very similar to this. On the next day, Saturday, the 11th at 8 p.m. So if we just hop forward one day, whoop, so you can kind of see that comet has already moved. But Pleiades is actually going to be a very bright star cluster that's going to be easy to see. Now, the fun thing about Pleiades is it is actually mistakenly referred to as the Little Dipper, which is not true because the Little Dipper is actually up near the North Pole. The North Pole of the sky. But you should be able to, again, look for Mars and then look more west, if I'm not mistaken. Let's make sure I'm not quoting you wrong. So yeah, you got west there. You can Venus and Jupiter are very noticeable in the night sky. As soon as you just look where the sun went down, you're going to see those two objects. And then if you just keep drawing that line straight upwards, you should find a very bright, excuse me, not very bright, but a noticeable small cluster of stars. Now it does take your eyes a little bit of time to adjust. So sitting outside for about 5 minutes to 15 minutes with low light pollution would definitely help. But it is going to be between Mars and Jupiter. No, not like exactly smack dab, but just to try and give you a good reference point on how to find it. So just look for Mars and then draw a straight line to Jupiter, and then just notice the small set of clusters closest to Mars that you can. And that should give you a good detail there. All right, and then the last detail is actually going to be Monday, February 13th at the middle of the day, 12:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9:01 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The moon will actually go into its third quarter stage. But of course, it's going to be up middle of the day. You can see the moon in the middle of the day. I know that baffled me at first. I was like, wait a minute, how can I see the moon in midday? But it is possible, but obviously more noticeable whenever it is dark. So trying to think through where the moon's going to be. Yes, I do still get a little bit lost in the night sky sometimes. But the trick that I've always learned with the moon is the moon will always follow the sun, and it does its best to follow. I cannot find the moon at all. Did I pass it? Do y'all see it and I missed it somewhere? There it is. So the moon always points at the sun and follows the sun, but it's slower, so the sun ends up lapping it, obviously hundreds of times. But so with the third quarter, you're going to start seeing that the sun and the moon get closer and closer and closer. So with that being said, it's going to be easier to see the moon in the morning than it is in the evening, because the moon will actually set before the sun. But again, you should still be able to see the moon. And in the middle of the day, it'll just be a little bit harder because obviously it's brighter. But those are going to be the events happening in the next 7 days. Again, the reason why I bring these events up is because I think it'd be pretty cool to sit with the Lord and ask him to see if he's revealing any more prophetic messages in the night sky. I still believe he does speak through the night sky, especially because Troy Brewer is so good about detailing eclipses, solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, in their meanings, their depth, all of that great detail that is just so mind-blowing. So